What if you could walk through life untouched by the storms of other people's words, moods, or actions? Imagine carrying a deep calm within you that no insult, no rejection, no conflict could ever disturb. This is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending to be unbothered. It is about transforming your inner world so that the outer world no longer has the power to control your peace. Carl Jung taught that what irritates us in others is often a reflection of something unresolved within ourselves. Anger and frustration are not simply reactions to the world, but mirrors pointing to hidden parts of our psyche waiting to be understood. In this lecture, we will uncover how to recognize those hidden projections, how to master the art of detachment, and how to cultivate a state of inner strength so profound that no one can shake it. If you are ready to step into a life where your mind and spirit remain steady no matter who tries to disturb your balance, then this message is for you. Carl Jung's concept of projection is one of the most powerful tools for understanding why people and situations trigger us so deeply. To grasp this, one must begin with the recognition that the human psyche contains both the conscious part we are aware of and identify with and the unconscious, which holds the repressed, hidden, and unacknowledged aspects of ourselves. Projection occurs when elements from this unconscious realm, often parts of ourselves we do not wish to face, are unknowingly attributed to others. Instead of recognizing that a certain trait, weakness, or potential resides within us, we place it on someone else and react strongly to it as if it belonged exclusively to them. This unconscious mechanism is the reason we find ourselves disproportionately angered, irritated, or disturbed by certain people, and yet unaffected by the same behavior in others. To never get angry or bothered by anyone, the first step is to realize that what we react to in others is often a mirror reflecting what lies unresolved in ourselves. When Jung spoke of the shadow, the disowned aspects of our personality, he made it clear that the parts of ourselves we repress do not disappear. They remain active, though hidden, and they seek expression in subtle and indirect ways. One of the most common ways is through projection. For example, if someone has repressed their own aggressiveness, they may find themselves constantly irritated by others who act assertively or display confidence. If one has varied feelings of laziness or inadequacy, they may be quick to judge others as unmotivated or incompetent. The anger that arises in these moments does not come from the external event itself but from the clash between our conscious self-image and the hidden qualities of the unconscious that we refuse to accept. The other person becomes a screen onto which we cast these unwanted traits, and our reactions become amplified precisely because they touch on something unresolved within. Recognizing this mechanism requires honesty and courage. Most people would rather believe that their anger is justified, that the source of their irritation is indeed the other person's behavior, rather than entertain the possibility that their strong emotional response is rooted in their own psyche. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of self-awareness and shadow work. To move toward a state where no one can bother us, we must continually ask ourselves, what within me is being revealed by this irritation? What is it about this person that I cannot stand, and why does it matter to me so deeply? By tracing the reaction inward, we shift from blaming the external world to understanding our own inner dynamics. This act of turning the gaze inward is the essence of individuation, the process Jung described as becoming whole by integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. To make this more concrete, consider a workplace setting. Perhaps you are angered by a colleague who always seems to seek attention, taking credit for work or constantly speaking up in meetings. At face value, this behavior is frustrating, but your intensity of anger might point to something deeper. Perhaps you were raised in an environment where expressing your talents was discouraged, and so you repressed your own desire to shine. When you see another person doing openly what you have denied yourself, it creates resentment. The projection makes you interpret them as arrogant, when in truth, their behavior is forcing you to confront your own unexpressed need for recognition. If you were at peace with this part of yourself, their actions would not hold such power over your emotions. Jung believed that everyone we encounter carries a lesson for us, because each reaction we have is a reflection of our inner landscape. The people who annoy us most deeply are paradoxically our greatest teachers, because they reveal the places within us that remain in shadow. To never be bothered by anyone means to embrace the discipline of using every irritation as a mirror. Instead of asking, why is this person like this? We begin asking, why does this bother me? This simple shift transforms life, because the power over our emotions no longer lies with others. The anger dissolves once we integrate the part of ourselves that we previously denied. Another aspect of projection involves not just negative traits but also positive ones. Jung noted that we often project our unacknowledged potentials onto others, idolizing or envying them. Just as anger points to repressed qualities, admiration points to latent strengths within us that we have yet to claim. When we see someone courageous, creative, or confident and feel inspired or jealous, we are seeing a reflection of our own unrealized potential. This too can create agitation. Why does their success bother us? Because it reminds us of what we could be but have not yet allowed ourselves to become. By recognizing this, we reclaim these projections and begin embodying the qualities we once saw only in others. The practice of reclaiming projections is not easy, because it requires humility. It is far more comfortable to believe that others are at fault, that the world around us is the cause of our irritation, than to admit that the trigger exists because of our own unresolved conflicts. Yet once we begin this work, the freedom it brings is profound. Imagine living in a world where no insult penetrates, where no behavior of others stirs anger within you, because you have integrated every part of yourself and nothing is left to be mirrored back unconsciously. This is not to say you will never notice rude or unjust behavior, but you will respond with clarity rather than emotional reactivity. The difference is everything. Anger consumes energy, clarity preserves it. Jung understood that much of human suffering comes not from external events but from our refusal to face the inner truths reflected back to us. Anger is a signal, not a solution. It signals where we are still unconscious, where the shadow still hides. Every time we become bothered by someone, we are offered an invitation to grow. If we ignore this invitation, the pattern repeats. We find ourselves continually irritated by different people in similar ways. But if we accept the invitation, the pattern dissolves, and the triggers lose their hold. Over time, fewer and fewer things bother us, because we have claimed the hidden parts of ourselves and brought them into the light. This process also reshapes our relationships. When we stop projecting our unresolved traits onto others, we begin to see people more clearly for who they are, not who we imagine them to be. Instead of judging them harshly or being swept into conflict, we respond with understanding. Often, the behaviors we once found intolerable become neutral, or even insignificant, because the charge was never in them, it was in us. This is the essence of psychological freedom. To never be bothered by anyone is not about controlling the world, but about integrating the self so fully that the world no longer has hooks to pull on. Jung's insights into projection can also be applied to the broader human experience. Entire groups, cultures, and societies project their shadows onto others, creating enemies and scapegoats. On a personal scale, this leads to interpersonal conflict. On a collective scale, it can lead to prejudice, division, and even war. Thus, the work of reclaiming projection is not only a path to personal peace, but also a contribution to peace in the world. Each individual who integrates their shadow and stops projecting contributes to a reduction of collective hostility. In this way, the journey of never being bothered by anyone becomes a deeply spiritual and moral endeavor. To engage in this practice, one must cultivate continuous self-reflection, journaling reactions, meditating on emotional triggers, and seeking the roots of anger within our practical steps. Therapy and inner dialogue can also help, as they provide safe spaces to explore the unconscious. Jung often encouraged dialogue with the unconscious through active imagination, where one allows the hidden parts of the psyche to express themselves creatively, whether through art, writing, or inner visualization. By bringing these unconscious contents into conscious awareness, projection decreases, and emotional freedom increases. It is important to note that this does not mean excusing harmful behavior or denying that others act wrongly. Jung was clear that individuation does not mean passivity. Rather, it means responding from a place of wholeness instead of unconscious reaction. You can still set boundaries, confront injustice, or walk away from toxic environments, but you do so without the inner turmoil of anger consuming you. The energy once lost to being bothered becomes available for constructive action, creativity, and personal growth. In summary, understanding Jung's concept of projection unveils why others have the power to anger or disturb us. They hold up a mirror to the disowned parts of ourselves, forcing us to confront what lies hidden in our own shadow. By recognizing, reclaiming, and integrating these parts, we dissolve the triggers that once controlled us. Over time, the people who once irritated us lose their power, because the source of our agitation no longer exists outside of us but has been resolved within. This is the foundation of moving toward a life where no one can disturb your peace. because you have embraced the fullness of your own being and transformed every reflection into an opportunity for growth. Differentiating between suppression of anger and true psychological detachment is essential for anyone who desires to live with calmness, composure, and emotional mastery. Many people mistakenly believe that to avoid being bothered or angered means to simply push the feelings away, to hold them down, or to pretend they do not exist. This act of repression or suppression, however, does not free the psyche. Instead, it buries emotions into the unconscious, where they continue to influence thoughts, behaviors, and relationships in indirect ways. Carl Jung warned that what is repressed does not vanish, but becomes even stronger in the unconscious, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Thus, the person who suppresses anger may appear calm on the surface, but is inwardly filled with tension, bitterness, or silent resentment. Suppression is an illusion of control, while true detachment is the fruit of inner transformation. To understand suppression, consider how society often conditions people to behave. Children are taught that certain emotions are unacceptable, that anger must not be expressed, and that to be good means to stay quiet and compliant. This training creates adults who, when they feel irritation, instinctively push it down rather than confront it. Instead of asking why they feel angry, they bury the energy and attempt to smile or distract themselves. But the unconscious does not forget, and this stored anger leaks out through passive-aggressive behavior, sudden outbursts, or psychosomatic symptoms such as headaches, anxiety, or physical illness. The person believes they have mastered anger, but in truth, the anger has mastered them by operating from the shadows. Psychological detachment, on the other hand, is an entirely different process. It does not deny anger, it observes it. When a person is detached, they recognize the rising energy of irritation within themselves, but they do not identify with it. They see it as a wave moving through the psyche rather than as their entire identity. Jung's approach to individuation emphasizes this awareness. The ego learns to recognize the contents of the unconscious without being controlled by them. Instead of saying, "I am angry," the detached person says, "Anger is arising in me." This shift in language demonstrates the shift in consciousness. The person no longer equates their whole being with the emotion. The emotion is recognized, acknowledged, and allowed to pass without being suppressed or acted upon. Destructively. To achieve detachment, one must cultivate an inner observer. This is the part of the psyche that can stand outside the immediate storm of emotions and simply witness what is happening. Jung's idea of the self, the larger organizing principle of the psyche, represents this observing awareness. The self does not get swept away by emotions, but integrates them into the broader journey of growth. Detachment comes from identifying more with this deeper self rather than the ego, which is always entangled in defending itself, seeking recognition, or reacting to perceived threats. When anchored in the self, the irritations of daily life lose their power because they no longer threaten one's sense of identity. One of the dangers of suppression is that it often masquerades as strength. People may pride themselves on not losing their cool, believing this means they have achieved mastery, when in fact they are boiling inside. They may carry years of unexpressed anger toward family, colleagues, or friends, but because they have learned to swallow their words, they assume they are detached. Yet, beneath the surface, the repressed emotions accumulate pressure, and sooner or later, they manifest explosively. True detachment, however, is calm without effort. It does not require force to maintain because nothing is being held down. The inner world is integrated, so there is no buildup of hidden energy waiting to erupt. Consider two different scenarios to illustrate the contrast. In the first, a person hears a colleague criticize their work unjustly. They feel a surge of anger but immediately suppress it, smiling politely while their body tenses. They replay the insult in their mind all day, complain inwardly about the injustice, and later, at home, they snap at their family over something trivial. Their suppression of anger at the workplace has not eliminated it, has simply displaced it, transferring it into another context where it causes harm. In the second scenario, the same criticism arises, but the person trained in detachment notices the emotional surge. They feel the heat of anger rise, but instead of pushing it away, they silently acknowledge, "I feel anger." They breathe, observe the thoughts that accompany it, and ask themselves whether the criticism reflects something true or whether it is simply another's projection. Because they observe without identification, the anger passes like a cloud. They may respond to the colleague with clarity, addressing the issue without hostility, or they may let it go if it lacks substance. The difference is profound. Suppression carries the anger forward. Detachment dissolves it. Jung's emphasis on integration shows that detachment is not about becoming numb or indifferent. Many people fear that detachment means coldness or apathy, but this is not the case. Detachment allows for the full range of emotions to be experienced, but without being enslaved by them. It is a middle path between suppression and indulgence. Suppression denies emotion. Indulgence explodes it outward. Without reflection, detachment experiences it, acknowledges it, and transcends it. A detached person is still moved by life, still able to feel deeply, but they are not destabilized by every passing irritation. This stability creates inner freedom. Another way to distinguish suppression from detachment is to look at the body. Suppression leaves tension in its wake. Shoulders tighten, jaws clench, stomachs knot, because the body is holding what the mind refuses to release. Detachment, however, leaves the body relaxed, even in the presence of irritation. This is because the energy of anger is allowed to flow through awareness rather than being trapped in resistance. One practical method for cultivating detachment is mindfulness of bodily sensations. When anger arises, instead of forcing it down, one can notice the heat in the chest, the tightening in the throat, or the pounding in the head. By bringing conscious attention to these sensations, the energy is processed rather than repressed. This conscious processing is the bridge to detachment. Jung also spoke about the necessity of understanding the symbolic meaning of emotions. Anger is not random, it is a message from the unconscious. Suppression ignores the message, while detachment receives it. By sitting with anger instead of burying it, one can ask, what is this emotion trying to reveal? Perhaps it is a sign that a boundary has been crossed, or that a hidden wound is being touched, or that a shadow aspect is demanding recognition. Detachment gives us the space to explore these questions without the destructive cycle of acting out or repressing. It turns anger into insight. Furthermore, suppression often creates a false persona. The individual projects an image of calmness, politeness, or saintliness while internally waging war with themselves. This split between outer appearance and inner reality is exactly what Jung described in his theory of the persona and shadow. The persona is the mask we show to the world, while the shadow contains what we hide. Suppression strengthens this divide, while detachment closes it by making the inner and outer life congruent. A detached person does not need to wear a mask of politeness to cover boiling rage. Instead, they radiate genuine calm because they are reconciled with their own emotions. True detachment also has a transformative effect on relationships. When someone is suppressing anger, others can often sense it through subtle cues, tone of voice, body language, or underlying tension. This creates mistrust, because the words and demeanor do not match the underlying emotion. Detachment, however, allows for authenticity. When emotions are acknowledged inwardly, communication becomes clearer outwardly. The detached person can express boundaries without aggression, can disagree without hostility, and can listen without defensiveness. This presence fosters respect and harmony, because interactions are no longer driven by hidden currents of repressed feelings. The journey from suppression to detachment requires practice. It begins with awareness, noticing when we are pushing feelings away instead of observing them. Each time anger arises, we have a choice. We can pretend it is not there, or we can meet it with consciousness. Over time, the repeated act of choosing awareness over suppression builds the muscle of detachment. It is not about eliminating anger, but about relating to it differently. Just as waves continue to arise on the ocean, emotions will always arise in human life. Detachment is like becoming the ocean itself, vast, steady, unbothered by the ripples on its surface. The person who learns detachment through Jung's framework finds themselves less and less disturbed by others, while suppression keeps one vulnerable to sudden eruptions. Detachment establishes a steady state of inner balance. Instead of being dragged into conflict or carrying resentment, they move through life with clarity. Their peace is not fragile because it is not based on denying reality. It is robust because it is rooted in truth. Emotions exist, but they do not define the self. The distinction between suppression and detachment is the difference between imprisonment and freedom, between living at the mercy of unconscious forces and living from the center of one's own integrated being. Developing self-awareness to master emotional responses, instead of reacting impulsively, is one of the central pillars of emotional and psychological freedom. Carl Jung emphasized that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will continue to direct our lives, and we will call it fate. This principle is especially visible in the way we react to anger, irritation, or annoyance. When a person is not self-aware, they are constantly pulled by the strings of unconscious impulses, snapping back at others, losing control, and then often regretting their words or actions afterward. Their anger controls them because they are not conscious of its roots or its movements within the psyche. Self-awareness is the light that makes visible the hidden forces operating within us, and once they are seen, they lose their power to dominate. To never get angry or bothered by anyone, cultivating this inner awareness is essential, because only then can we respond intentionally rather than react reflexively. Self-awareness begins with observation. Many people live entirely identified with their thoughts and emotions, believing that whatever passes through their minds is who they are. If they feel anger, they immediately act it out as though the feeling is a command to be obeyed. Jung would argue that this lack of separation between the self and the contents of the mind keeps us bound in unconsciousness. To grow in awareness, we must learn to step back and watch our inner life as though we are both participant and observer. This creates a subtle distance between the emotion and the self, a space in which freedom is born. For example, instead of immediately raising one's voice in response to an insult, self-awareness allows one to notice the heat rising in the body, the tightening in the chest, the rapid flow of thoughts demanding retaliation. In that very noticing, a choice appears. One can continue down the path of impulse, or one can pause and choose a different response. That pause is where mastery begins. This practice requires discipline because the human mind is wired to react quickly, especially in situations perceived as threatening. Anger, from a biological standpoint, is a survival mechanism. It prepares the body to defend itself, sharpening focus and flooding the system with energy. While this was essential in earlier stages of human evolution when physical threats were common, in the modern world anger is often triggered by psychological or social threats rather than physical danger. A colleague's criticism, a friend's betrayal, or a stranger's rude remark can trigger the same flood of energy, even though there is no actual threat to survival. Without self-awareness, one becomes a prisoner to this ancient biological mechanism, lashing out in situations that require clarity rather than aggression. Self-awareness breaks this cycle by reminding us that not every surge of anger needs to be acted upon. Jung's teachings on the shadow also intersect here. Much of what drives impulsive reactions is the unacknowledged material of the unconscious. When someone criticizes us, for example, the intensity of our response often depends on whether their words touch a hidden wound or an unresolved part of the psyche. If their insult aligns with something we fear about ourselves, the anger becomes explosive. Self-awareness allows us to notice this dynamic and to ask, why does this hurt so much? Why do I feel the need to react so strongly? Often, the answer points back to hidden insecurities, suppressed desires, or shadow elements we have not yet integrated. Instead of reacting, self-awareness gives us the opportunity to explore and understand the roots of our emotions. Turning irritation into insight. One of the practical ways to cultivate this awareness is through reflection. When anger arises, journaling about the experience can reveal patterns. Over time, one may discover that certain themes repeat. Perhaps criticism from authority figures always stirs anger, or perhaps being ignored evokes frustration more than anything else. These patterns are not random, they point to core wounds, or unresolved aspects of the psyche. By becoming conscious of them, one begins to loosen their grip. Self-awareness shines light into these areas, reducing the power they hold. This is how we begin to master responses instead of being mastered by them. Another vital element of self-awareness is learning to distinguish between perception and reality. Jung noted that much of what we see in the world is colored by projections from our own psyche. In moments of anger, we often assume that others intend to harm, disrespect, or insult us, when in fact they may not. Our minds fill in intentions that may not exist. Self-awareness allows us to question these assumptions before reacting. Instead of immediately concluding, they are trying to humiliate me, we can pause and consider alternative explanations. Perhaps they were careless, stressed, or unaware of how their words sounded. This simple act of questioning our perception diffuses anger and prevents unnecessary conflict. Without awareness, the mind treats assumptions as facts, and reactions follow automatically. With awareness, we create space to evaluate and choose. Developing self-awareness also requires attention to the body, because emotions are not only mental but also physiological. Anger manifests physically through heat, tightness, increased heartbeat, and adrenaline surges. Often, people are unaware of these bodily signals until they are already overwhelmed. Training oneself to notice the early signs of anger is a powerful tool for mastery. For example, recognizing the tightening of the jaw or the quickening of the breath can serve as an early warning system. By catching the emotion early, one can pause, breathe, and reflect before the reaction escalates. This bodily awareness complements psychological awareness, together forming a complete picture of the emotional process. Self-awareness also expands through practices such as meditation and mindfulness, which train the mind to observe without judgment. By spending time each day watching thoughts and emotions arise and pass, one strengthens the capacity to remain centered even in the midst of triggering situations. Jung valued inner practices that cultivated a dialogue with the unconscious, such as active imagination, which invites hidden aspects of the psyche to express themselves in imagery or dialogue. These practices deepen awareness of the inner landscape, reducing the chances of being hijacked by unconscious reactions. It is also important to recognize that self-awareness does not mean self-criticism. Many people, upon noticing their anger, immediately judge themselves harshly, thinking, "I should not feel this way," or "I am failing at being calm." This only adds another layer of repression. True self-awareness is compassionate. It observes anger without judgment, understanding it as a natural human response that carries information. By approaching emotions with curiosity rather than condemnation, we create space to learn from them. Over time, this compassionate observation dissolves the compulsion to react impulsively, because we no longer fight against the emotion itself. Another dimension of self-awareness is understanding triggers. Everyone has unique sensitivities shaped by their past experiences, upbringing, and personal wounds. Self-awareness involves mapping these triggers and recognizing when they are activated. For example, someone who grew up feeling unseen may react strongly to being ignored in adulthood. Without awareness, they may lash out at others for minor slights, believing the anger is about the present moment. With awareness, they recognize that the present irritation is connected to past pain. This recognition reduces the intensity of the reaction and allows them to respond more appropriately. Jung believed that by tracing these emotional threads back to their roots, we integrate the past into consciousness, freeing ourselves from its unconscious grip. The more self-aware we become, the less we take things personally. Much of anger arises from the belief that others' actions are direct attacks on our worth or dignity. Self-awareness reveals that most people act from their own unconscious drives, fears, and shadows, often with little relation to us. A harsh word from someone may be more about their own frustration than about who we are. By recognizing this, we stop internalizing every slight and begin to see others' behavior as reflections of their inner world, not judgments on ours. This perspective drastically reduces the frequency and intensity of anger. Self-awareness also strengthens the ability to choose constructive responses. Once we notice anger without being consumed by it, we can decide whether to speak, stay silent, set boundaries, or walk away. Each choice becomes conscious rather than automatic. This capacity to choose is the essence of mastery. A person who can feel anger fully yet decide not to act destructively possesses far more power than one who explodes impulsively. Jung described individuation as becoming the master of one's own house, where all parts of the psyche are acknowledged and integrated. Self-awareness is the key that unlocks this mastery, turning chaotic reactions into deliberate actions. Over time, as self-awareness deepens, life changes in profound ways. Situations that once triggered explosive reactions lose their power. Insults that once burned now pass like wind through an open window. The ego, which once felt constantly threatened, relaxes because it is no longer identified with every passing emotion. The self, the deeper center of being, becomes the anchor. From this place, one responds to life with calm strength, unbothered by the turbulence around. This is not achieved through repression but through the patient cultivation of awareness, observation, and integration. Thus, developing self-awareness is not just a psychological practice but a spiritual path. It bridges the conscious and unconscious, bringing light where there was darkness, freedom where there was compulsion. Each act of awareness is a step away from slavery to impulse and a step toward mastery of self. In this way, the individual learns not only to manage anger but to transcend it, living with a steady calmness that no external provocation can shake. Cultivating inner strength through individuation and integration of the shadow is at the very heart of Carl Jung's psychology and is one of the most effective ways to ensure that no one has the power to disturb your peace or provoke uncontrollable anger within you. To grasp this process, one must first understand what individuation truly means. Jung described individuation as the lifelong process of becoming whole, of integrating the unconscious with the conscious self, so that the individual is not fragmented or ruled by hidden aspects of the psyche. Within this framework, the shadow plays a central role. The shadow consists of the rejected, denied, or unacknowledged parts of ourselves, qualities, desires, impulses, and emotions that we have pushed away because they do not align with our ideal image of who we think we are or who we wish to appear to be. The tragedy is that by denying these parts, we give them power over us. The shadow, though hidden, is not inactive. It surfaces through projection, reactivity, and compulsions. Thus, cultivating inner strength demands not the elimination of the shadow, but its integration. When people live divided from their shadow, they are constantly thrown off balance. They may overreact in anger when confronted by traits in others that they secretly harbor themselves. They may feel disturbed by actions that mirror their own repressed tendencies. A person who has suppressed their own selfishness may explode in rage when encountering it in another. Someone who has denied their own vulnerability may feel contempt toward others who display weakness. These reactions reveal the lack of integration. The unacknowledged shadow, operating from the unconscious, manipulates emotions and behaviors in ways that keep the ego fragile and easily disturbed. Cultivating inner strength requires confronting this shadow directly, acknowledging it without judgment, and drawing it into the wholeness of the self. Jung taught that the shadow is not inherently evil. While it contains aspects we may find unpleasant or shameful, it also contains unclaimed energy, creativity, and vitality. When we integrate the shadow, we reclaim these resources. Anger, for instance, is not only destructive, it is also a signal of boundaries, an energy that can fuel courage and assertiveness when integrated consciously. A person who suppresses anger may become passive, easily manipulated, or resentful, while a person who integrates anger learns to channel it constructively, setting boundaries and standing firm without being ruled by blind reactivity. In this way, the shadow becomes a source of power rather than weakness. The process of integration requires honesty and courage. It begins by observing one's emotional reactions in daily life. Each time someone provokes anger, irritation, or defensiveness, it is an opportunity to ask, what part of myself is being reflected here? What in this other person reminds me of something within me that I have not yet accepted? This reflection opens the door to shadow work. For example, if you find yourself constantly bothered by people who are arrogant, it may be worth asking whether you have denied your own desire for recognition and power. If you find yourself annoyed by others' dependence, perhaps you have suppressed your own need for care and support, instead of continuing to project these traits outward. Integration means owning them within yourself, admitting that they are part of the human experience and part of your own psyche. This ownership does not mean indulgence. It does not mean giving free rein to destructive tendencies. Rather, it means acknowledging them consciously so that they do not control you unconsciously. The individual who admits to their own capacity for arrogance, selfishness, or weakness gains mastery over these traits because they are no longer hidden. The energy once bound in repression becomes available for conscious use. This is the essence of inner strength, knowing the full range of who you are and being at peace with it, rather than denying parts of yourself and being secretly controlled by them. Individuation, therefore, is a process of reconciliation. It reconciles opposites within the psyche, light and dark, good and bad, strength and vulnerability. Jung believed that wholeness, not perfection, is the true aim of human development. Perfection seeks to eliminate flaws, which leads to repression and denial. Wholeness embraces flaws, integrates them, and turns them into sources of wisdom and power. A person who has achieved a degree of individuation is no longer easily angered or bothered by others, because they no longer need to defend a fragile self-image. Their identity is not built on a mask of perfection but on the authenticity of wholeness. Criticism does not shatter them, because they already know and accept their imperfections. Provocations do not disturb them, because they have befriended their own shadow and are no longer triggered by its reflection in others. This inner strength manifests as a calm presence. Others may lash out, criticize, or attempt to provoke, but the individuated person remains centered. They recognize that what others project has more to do with the other's shadow than with themselves, because they have integrated their own. shadow, they are not drawn into cycles of projection and counter-projection. Instead, they can observe with clarity, respond with wisdom, or simply remain unbothered. Their calmness is not forced or artificial. It is rooted in the deep integration of the psyche. Jung emphasized that this process often requires descending into what he called the night sea journey, or the descent into the unconscious. This means confronting painful, shameful, or frightening aspects of oneself that have been buried. It is a journey many avoid, preferring to maintain the illusion of control by keeping the shadow hidden. Yet, without this descent, individuation cannot occur, and inner strength remains. Shallow, those who dare to face their own darkness emerge transformed, carrying within them a resilience that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. They no longer fear what lies within, and therefore they no longer fear what others may reflect back to them. Practical methods for integrating the shadow include journaling, dream analysis, active imagination, and mindful observation of emotional triggers. Jung placed special emphasis on dreams, believing that they reveal the hidden contents of the unconscious in symbolic form. By reflecting on recurring dream themes, one can identify shadow elements, seeking recognition. Active imagination, a practice Jung developed, involves entering into dialogue with these hidden aspects through visualization and creative expression, allowing them to speak and be acknowledged. These practices bring unconscious material into consciousness, reducing its power to control behavior. In relationships, the integration of the shadow transforms interactions. Conflicts that once spiraled into anger become opportunities for understanding. Instead of reacting defensively when criticized, the individuated person asks whether there is truth in the words and what the emotional response reveals about themselves. This does not mean accepting unjust treatment, but it means responding with clarity instead of blind anger. The ability to see both oneself and others with compassion and depth prevents the escalation of conflict and preserves peace of mind. Individuation also involves aligning with the deeper self, which Jung described as the organizing principle of the psyche, transcending the ego. The self encompasses both the conscious and unconscious, guiding the individual toward wholeness. When one identifies with the ego alone, life becomes a constant battle to protect an image, to resist threats, and to seek validation. This fragility makes one easily disturbed by others. But when one identifies with the self, there is a sense of rootedness that cannot be shaken. The irritations of daily life are seen from a larger perspective, as part of the unfolding journey of growth. This identification with the self is the ultimate source of inner strength, because it connects the individual to something beyond the fluctuations of ego and emotion. It is worth noting that cultivating this inner strength is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous process. The shadow has many layers, and individuation unfolds across a lifetime. Each new stage of life reveals new aspects of the unconscious that require integration. Yet with each integration, the individual grows stronger, calmer, and less vulnerable to external disturbance. The journey itself becomes a source of meaning, and the pursuit of wholeness provides resilience in the face of challenges. This strength also radiates outward, influencing others. A person who has integrated their shadow and cultivated inner strength becomes a stabilizing presence in their community. Their calmness calms others, their clarity invites clarity, and their refusal to be provoked reduces conflict around them. Jung believed that the individuation of individuals contributes to the healing of the collective, because each integrated person reduces the amount of unconscious projection in the world. In this way, cultivating inner strength is not only a personal achievement but also a service to humanity. By walking the path of individuation and embracing the shadow, one gains a strength that is not brittle but flexible, not defensive but secure. This strength allows one to stand in the midst of provocation without anger, to face criticism without collapse, and to interact with others without being easily disturbed. It is a strength born not of repression but of integration, not of pretending to be flawless but of embracing the fullness of human nature. Through this process, the individual becomes whole, and in wholeness lies the unshakable peace that no one else can take away. Practical steps to achieve emotional freedom and remain unbothered by external negativity must be grounded not only in psychological theory but also in daily habits and conscious choices that reshape the way we interact with ourselves and the world. Carl Jung's insights into projection, shadow integration, and individuation provide the framework, but unless these ideas are lived out through practice, they remain abstract. Emotional freedom is not achieved in a single breakthrough moment but through consistent cultivation of awareness, discipline, and intentional action. To live unbothered is to create a way of being where the disturbances of others are met with clarity and calm rather than reactivity and turmoil. This is a skill that can be learned, strengthened, and eventually embodied until it becomes second nature. The first practical step is cultivating daily self-reflection without reflection. Unconscious patterns remain hidden, and anger continues to erupt without understanding. Reflection can take many forms: journaling at the end of the day, pausing in silence after interactions, or meditating on the emotions that arose in response to specific events. The key is honesty. Instead of blaming others for the irritation, reflection requires asking, why did that bother me? What did I feel threatened by? Was the reaction proportionate to the situation? Over time, patterns emerge, showing clearly where one's triggers lie. This awareness becomes the foundation for transforming reactions into responses. The second step is the practice of mindfulness in the moment. Reflection at the end of the day helps, but true freedom comes when awareness is present during the triggering event itself. Mindfulness means noticing the sensations of anger as they begin tightening muscles, racing thoughts, a surge of heat without being carried away by them. This requires training because the mind's habit is to react instantly. Techniques such as focusing on the breath, grounding oneself by noticing the environment, or silently naming the emotion anger is arising interrupt the automatic chain reaction by creating even a small pause. Mindfulness opens the door to choice. This pause is the difference between reacting impulsively and responding with intention. A third step involves setting conscious boundaries. Emotional freedom does not mean allowing others to mistreat us or accepting toxic environments without response. Rather, it means choosing how to engage without anger. Setting boundaries calmly and clearly is a practical way to maintain peace. For example, if someone repeatedly speaks disrespectfully, one can assert, "I am not willing to be spoken to in that way," and step away if necessary. This is not suppression of anger but the conscious use of assertiveness. The ability to enforce boundaries without hostility is a mark of integration, because it channels the energy of anger into constructive protection of dignity and well-being. Another step is practicing detachment through perspective shifting. When someone criticizes or insults, the ego interprets it as a personal attack, yet often their words reflect their own frustrations, insecurities, or projections. By reminding oneself that this is more about them than me, detachment is maintained. This does not mean ignoring all feedback, but discerning whether the criticism holds truth or is merely projection. If there is truth, it can be used for growth without self-condemnation. If it is projection, it can be released without emotional entanglement. Regularly practicing this perspective builds resilience, because external negativity loses its sting when we recognize it is not ours to carry. The fifth step is shadow work, actively seeking out and integrating hidden parts of the self. Practical methods include analyzing dreams, engaging in active imagination, or writing dialogues with aspects of the psyche. For instance, if you notice a recurring irritation toward arrogant people, you might write a dialogue with your own inner arrogance, asking why it was suppressed and what it needs to be expressed in a healthy form. By engaging directly with the shadow, its power to provoke unconscious reactions decreases. Shadow work is not easy. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths, but it is one of the most effective ways to ensure that external negativity no longer hooks into hidden wounds. Another step toward emotional freedom is practicing forgiveness, not as a moral obligation but as a release of energy. Holding on to resentment binds you to the actions of others, keeping their negativity alive within your own psyche. Forgiveness does not mean excusing harmful behavior or forgetting boundaries. It means choosing not to let anger poison your inner life. This can be practiced through visualization, imagining releasing the other person from your grip, or through prayer, asking for strength to let go. Each act of forgiveness lightens the emotional load, making it harder for new offenses to take root. Physical practices also support emotional freedom. The body holds anger in tension, and regular exercise, deep breathing, or practices like yoga and tai chi help release stored energy. This makes it easier to remain calm in stressful moments, because the body is not already burdened with unresolved tension. Pausing to breathe deeply during moments of irritation is a simple but powerful way to shift from reaction to response. A slow, conscious breath signals to the nervous system that there is no danger, calming the fight or flight response and creating space for reflection. Cultivating empathy is another practical step. When someone lashes out or behaves rudely, instead of reacting with anger, one can ask, what pain might this person be carrying? This does not excuse their behavior, but reframes it. Empathy transforms the encounter from conflict into understanding. Even if the behavior remains unacceptable, the emotional charge is reduced, because we see it as an expression of their struggle rather than as a personal attack. Over time, practicing empathy weakens the habit of taking things personally. One of the main roots of anger, equally important, is the practice of gratitude. Anger often thrives when we focus exclusively on what is wrong or threatening. By cultivating a habit of noticing what is good, supportive, or meaningful in life, the mind becomes less reactive. Gratitude shifts attention from scarcity to abundance, from threat to safety. A simple daily practice of listing things to be grateful for can transform the emotional baseline, making irritation less frequent and less intense. Another step is aligning with a larger sense of purpose or meaning. When one is grounded in a vision greater than the self, small provocations lose significance. Jung emphasized the importance of connecting with the self, the deeper center of being. When life is lived from this deeper orientation, external negativity appears small in comparison to the broader journey of individuation. Whether through spiritual practice, creative work, or service to others, grounding in a higher purpose provides perspective that shields against trivial disturbances. Self-care is also essential for emotional freedom. Fatigue, hunger, and stress make the mind more reactive and less capable of detachment. Ensuring adequate rest, proper nutrition, and balanced routines strengthens resilience. Many episodes of anger are intensified not because the trigger was great, but because the inner resources were depleted. Caring for the body and mind builds a foundation of stability, making it easier to remain calm when confronted with negativity. One must also practice conscious communication. Instead of reacting with defensive or aggressive words, learning to express oneself calmly and clearly prevents escalation. This includes using I statements rather than accusations, listening actively, and speaking only after reflecting. Conscious communication prevents anger from spiraling into conflict and helps maintain inner peace even in challenging conversations. Another practical method is visualization and rehearsal. One can imagine situations that typically trigger anger being criticized, cut off in traffic, ignored in conversation, and mentally rehearsed responding with calm detachment. This mental practice conditions the nervous system and the mind to choose new patterns. When the real situation arises, the rehearsed calmness is more readily available. Over time, this reprogramming creates automatic responses of composure rather than impulsivity. Spiritual practices also play a role in achieving emotional freedom. Prayer, contemplation, or connecting with sacred texts can anchor the mind in peace and remind us of a reality larger than our immediate frustrations. Jung himself emphasized the spiritual dimension of individuation, recognizing that connection with the self often transcends ordinary ego concerns. By cultivating a spiritual practice, one develops resilience against negativity because one's identity is anchored beyond the fluctuations of daily interactions. Surrounding oneself with supportive environments is another practical step. While it is impossible to avoid negativity entirely, one can choose to spend more time with people and environments that uplift rather than drain. This does not mean avoiding all challenges, but it does mean recognizing the impact of environment on emotional health. Choosing wisely where to invest time and energy reduces the frequency of unnecessary irritations and helps maintain a steady state of calmness. Finally, practicing patience is key. Emotional freedom is not achieved overnight. Triggers will continue to arise, and moments of anger will still occur. Patience allows us to see these moments not as failures but as opportunities for practice. Each time we notice and pause, each time we respond rather than react, we are strengthening new neural pathways and moving closer to lasting freedom. With patience, the process itself becomes the teacher, and every provocation becomes a stepping stone toward mastery. By weaving together these practical steps, reflection, mindfulness, boundaries, detachment, shadow work, forgiveness, physical release, empathy, gratitude, purpose, self-care, conscious communication, visualization, spiritual practice, supportive environments, and patience, one constructs a life where anger no longer controls the mind, where negativity cannot easily disturb peace, and where inner freedom becomes the natural state of being.